Good evening, everybody. As Melissa said, my name is Eli Malki. Melissa said before that if you have any problems with the Israeli government, you should speak up. So if you didn't have any problem, it means that you haven't encountered yet the Israeli government. I'm sure you'll find out. I would like to talk a little bit about, I would say, finance and decisions which we as either you as young people or we as people who are not so young have to take in the context of the Israeli legal framework and the Israeli investment arena. Usually I speak to young people. I teach in 2 universities, so my crowd is usually in the age of like 25 to 35. And there are 2 major decisions that we need to take when we are very young. The first is about saving for retirement, which we usually don't think about when we are 25 or 35, but when we reach the age, it becomes essential. And the second is taking a mortgage, which means investing in our apartment. Also a decision which we usually take when we are young and has effect on our life like 20, 30 years after that. So I will discuss these 2 decisions or the alternatives in the Israeli context, and we'll try to explain to you what are the options and what are the factors that should affect our decisions in these 2 topics. So we'll start with the saving first. Most young people say, well, saving is not for me. I'm too young. I will think about it when I will be much older. However, in Israel, assuming that you have jobs and you work and you get salaries, you are savers, whether you like it or not. Because in Israel, saving for pension is compulsory. You are required to save by the law, so you have no option. So once we understood that, let's try to understand what are the alternatives and what are the choices that we should make as savers. So the law in Israel, and it's more or less a new law. It was put into effect in 2009, is that every employee has to save for retirement with a certain percentage of salary. Part of it is paid by the employer, part of it is paid by the employee, and there are different venues, different ways to do that. So we'll start with the minimal. The minimal, which is required by the law and was updated recently in January 1st, 2014, is the following. 6% out of the salary is allocated for severance payment. I will talk about that, a few words about that. Then another 6% by the employer for pension, and 5.5% for pension from the employee. So we have altogether 6, and 5.5. It comes to 17.5% out of salary, which goes for saving, for pension. However, of that 17.5, 12% is not on our expense. The employer has to pay that on their expense. Okay? Now, the 12% is divided, as I said, 6% for severance, 6% for pension. Now, what do we mean by severance payment? Again, the Israeli law requires that if you worked and you were dismissed, you were fired, the employer has to pay you, assuming that you worked more than 1 year, 1 month of your last salary for each year of working, assuming that you worked full-time. If you didn't work full-time, like you work 50% or 75%, that the payment will be adjusted accordingly. And if you worked for a certain period and in 1 year you worked 25%, in 1 year you worked 100%, then the payment will be adjusted as a weighted average of your employment. By the way, if you have any questions, you're most welcome to stop me. Yes?
Sorry, what's considered full-time in Israel?
Well, full-time will be, on a monthly basis, will be 186 hours, weekly 43 hours, which is 5 days, 8.5 hours a day. That will be a full-time position. And usually in your pay slip, when you receive it, you will see whether you work full-time or not. It will be stated there, like the percentage of your position. Okay, so if it says 100%, then you're full-time. If it says 75%, then you are less than full-time. So since Israeli employers are required by law to pay severance payment, it will be advisable for them to kind of hedge against the risk, because from the point of view of the employer, it's a risk that if employees are dismissed, they have to pay them. And the money which is put aside for severance payment is basically the employee's money in case we are dismissed, we are fired. Now, 6% does not cover 1 month of salary. What covers a month of salary is 8.33. All right, if you divide 1 divided by 12, you get 8.33%. Okay, you're with me with the percentage? So like if we had 10 months in a year, so 1 month will be 10%. Since we have 12 months, then 1 month equals 8.33. So if I put aside 8.33% each month, at the end of the year, I have like a 1 month salary. And that covers exactly my obligation as an employer. All right? So if I am a smart employer, I will put aside not 6% as is required by the law, but 8.33%. And most, let's say, responsible employers do that. So the usual allocation for pension will not be 6, 6, and 5.5, which is required by law, but will be 8.33 and 5 and 5. 5 for pension and on behalf or on the expense of the employer, and 5 on the expense of the employee, which will bring us not to 17.5 but to 18.33. So employers that put aside 18.33 are not required to follow the 17.5 because they put aside more than that. All right? The saving of the employee is higher. Yes?
When you say that they take it, like the employer puts it aside, he's taking that out of your salary.
No.
Or he's saying 8% of whatever you make, I'm going to add to that.
Exactly. Whatever is on the...
So you're not losing money.
No. The only thing you're losing is what I said is on the employee's cost, which is the 5% in the second variant or the 5.5% in the first variant. All right, so we have different variants here, and I will try to explain each one of them. Now, let's talk about the third variant, and then I will try to explain where is the money. Like, you know, in the movie of Jerry Maguire, show me the money. So you were asking, where's the money? So I'll tell you where the money is. Now, there is a third variant. The third variant relates to a section in the Israeli pension law, which is called Section 14, which basically is a mutual agreement between the employer and the employee. Now, the agreement relates to a situation when we are dismissed. The employer has to pay us our severance payment. Now, in many cases, the money in the fund, which I'll talk about the fund in a minute, but the money in the fund for the severance is not enough to cover the entire obligation of the employer. Now, that can be due to many reasons. One of them is that the employer was not responsible enough and they didn't save in the past. For example, in my organization, in KNO, the law that requires saving for pension was issued in 2009. Now, KNO allocated before that, but 15 years ago, they didn't allocate anything for pension. It wasn't required by law. They didn't have any money, so they didn't do it. Now, an employee who has been working for like 15 years, 20 years, we have certain employees who have been working for 25 years, they don't have enough money in their pension fund to cover their severance payment. What happens if this employee is dismissed? The employer, we, K&O, have to pay them out of our budget. If we don't have the money in the fund, it's our problem. It's not the employee's problem. We have to pay from our budget, from our ongoing budget. So this is a risk for any organization. And in order to protect employer from this risk, there is a possibility in the Israeli law that both employers and employees will sign on a mutual agreement, which is called Section 14. And what Section 14 says is that the employee will receive only the funds which are in the fund, in the severance fund, providing that the employer has allocated its obligation starting from the first day of employment. That's one. And number two, that the employer must increase the allocation for the pension from 5 to 6, and the employee from 5 to 5.5. So if we follow Section 14, what we have is 8.33 for severance, 6 by the employee for pension, which brings us to 14.33, plus 5.5 on the account of the employee, which will bring us to 19.8 almost 20% for pension. And if that money is put aside, the law will allow the signing on Section 14, and that means that the employee will receive for severance only whatever is in the fund. Okay, so we have basically 3 variants. There are other variants. I won't cover all of them, but these are the most common 3 variants. The first is what is required by law, which is 6 for severance, 6 by the employer for pension, and 5.5 by the employee for pension. The second one is the most common, which is 8.33 for severance, 5 and 5. And the last one is the Section 14, which will be 8.33, 6 and 5.5. All right, so these are, I would say, the basic saving options that we all have, just due to the fact that we are employed by somebody. If we are self-employed, this is a different story and a different issue. But let's talk about the grand majority of people who work for others. Now, where is the money? Okay, that was your question. So in the past, the Israeli pension system was like a state pension system. I used to work in the JDC. I was the CFO of the former Soviet Union for 10 years. So in the former Soviet Union, the pension system is a state-owned system, and it collapsed. I mean, theoretically, people are covered. In practice, people received $50 a month, $100 a month, and they have to live with prices that more or less equals what we pay here. So in Israel, they moved to a system which is similar to what you have in the United States or in European countries. And that is that the money is kept by special funds, and their job is to keep the money for us. All right? Now, there are 2 major arrangements in which our money is being kept for saving for our retirement. The first is a pension fund, and the second is called director insurance. It's a fancy name, but it's basically more or less the same. I would say that this fancy name, director's insurance in Hebrew, it will be Bituach Menalim, was a very good seller. People thought that if they have director's insurance, they become directors, but that's the way marketing works. So the difference is that a pension fund is a kind of a collective agreement between all the savers in which we all put our money to a certain pool, which is the fund, and when we retire, we receive back from the pool, depending on how much the pool made altogether, and depending on withdrawal from the pool. And I will elaborate about that a little bit further. While a director insurance is a contract between me or you and the insurance company, while the insurance company commits itself to certain obligation. So one major difference between director's insurance and a pension fund is that since the director's insurance is a contract, then whatever is written in the contract is obligatory. The company has to follow unless it bankrupts. But as long as the insurance company is solvent, it has to follow the clauses of the agreement, while pension fund is more flexible. It's like whatever will be, will be. On the other hand, pension fund is much cheaper than director's insurance in terms of the management fees. Management fees is what we pay the whoever manages the money for us for their trouble, whatever that trouble is. So in director's insurance, the management fees are much higher than pension funds. And in recent years, most people prefer the pension funds on the director insurance, mainly due to the lower management fees. Now, I would say there are a few things or factors that we have to think about or consider when we try to manage our way in this labyrinth. The first is we save for pension. What will we get at the end? That's basically the bottom line, right? We want to know when we will retire, how much will we get? What will be our allowance? What will be our pension? So the way the calculation is done is that when we reach retirement age, which is now in Israel 65 for women and 67 for men, we are entitled to get our allowance. Now, either pension fund or the insurance company, they see how much money was saved in our fund, what we have there. And then they divide it by something which is called the conversion coefficient or the allowance coefficient. In Hebrew, it will be Mekadem Kitzva or Mekadem Hamara, which is today around 200. And that means that assuming that we have, let's say, 2 million shekels at our fund, then we will have a monthly pension of 10,000 shekels a month. All right, 2 million divided by 200. That is more or less the calculation. So a very important factor is how do they calculate the conversion factor, the 200? How did they reach this number, this magic number? Because this number will determine what will be our allowance. If the conversion factor will be not 200 but 250, we'll get a much smaller pension. Okay? We all understand that. That's a very basic mathematics. So apparently the conversion factor today cannot be known in advance. In the past, one of the advantages of the director's insurance was that the conversion factor was guaranteed. It was a contract, and it was contractually guaranteed. While today, there is no guaranteed conversion factor, and the reason is that we live too much, which means that life expectancy is getting higher, and conversion factors have to reflect the increase in life expectancy. So the longer we live, see what happens is that once the pension fund or the insurance company committed to a certain level of allowance, they have to pay us this allowance until the day we die. So if we live longer, we cause losses to the pension fund. I would say that the interest of the pension fund is that we all die at 65 and 1 day, or 67 one day, depending if we're men or women. While our interest probably will be to live longer, right? But the more we live, the less profitable the deal becomes to the pension fund or to the insurance company. Yes, you want to ask something?
Yeah, like let's say you started with 2 million and then you died before you finished receiving that.
All right, so I'll talk about that in a minute. So basically what happens is that the Ministry of Finance determines basically what is the life expectancy which is used for the calculation of the conversion coefficient. Right now, I think it's around 84. And if the Ministry of Finance will decide, let's say 20 years from now, 30 years from now, when we'll retire, that life expectancy went up, then the conversion factor will change. It will increase and we'll receive a smaller pension. So the first thing we have to know that we cannot know in advance what will be our income when we will retire. There is no way to know that in both alternatives. So no alternatives is better in that respect. Now what happens if we die before? So most pension plans also have some insurance component which is built in them. And that is also another decision that we have to take when we're young and we don't think about it, but we have to take it. And that is how we want to divide our pension between saving and insurance. Now, in all the pension plans in Israel, there is a possibility for what is called relative allowance. Relative allowance, kitzvat she'erim, it's in Hebrew. It means what or how much money or what will be the allowance of our relatives, the spouse, the living spouse, wife or husband, if we die before them. All right, so let's say that I have a saving account and I have a pension and I die before my wife. What will my wife receive if I die before her? If it's my pension plan, or the opposite if it's her pension plan. Now, there are different plans in which we can decide today how we want our money to be kept. We can decide that we want everything for saving with no relative allowance. We can decide for a larger relative allowance, which will be obviously on the expense on the allowance that we receive when we are alive. So basically, it's a kind of a combination between an insurance, because a relative allowance is a kind of insurance, right? We die, but we want to insure our relatives to make sure that they'll get money for at least the rest of their life. And we can decide about the fraction of how much we want. Now, the larger the relative allowance will be, the smaller will be our pension when we are alive. Okay? And there are different plans for that. One thing we said is the conversion factor, which we cannot know in advance, which, there's nothing we can do about it. The other thing is choosing. All right? So in Israel, according to the law here, any employee can choose any company to manage his or her funds. The employer cannot dictate and cannot tell you, you have to choose that or you have to choose that. It's our choice. So that is a good thing. The bad thing is that there is not really much choice. I mean, most of the companies, they do the same thing. They are more of the same. That's something which hopefully will change here. But the Israeli pension system is not as sophisticated as in the United States. In the United States, there are what you call individual retirement accounts, IRA, in which people can save to their pensions based on their decisions, which means that you can either decide to do it yourself, like manage your own fund, or you can take your own fund manager and let this person manage your money, or you can put your money in a certain managed account and let somebody else, like whatever, Vanguard or any other company, manage your funds. In Israel, these options do not exist, unfortunately, and the only options are managed account by different companies, but they basically do the same thing, which there is a lot of choice, but the choice is very limited in scope. Hopefully it will change. Now, why that is important? It's important because the major factor that determines how much money we will have in our account is, first of all, how much we save, and we saw that in the different variants of saving, the time horizon, and the, I would say, adaptation of our saving to our age and needs. Okay, so let's talk about each one of them. The first, how much we save. Now, many people, especially when they're young, and I did the same, when we are fired, we need the money, we take the severance payment. We use them. We either use them for, buying something, or to live off that money for the period that we are unemployed, or just for going abroad, taking a 1-year break and going to India to have some fun. Now, what we have to understand that once we took the money out of the fund, the compounding stops on that 8.33% or 6%, whatever is allocated for our severance payment. So when I said like we save between 17.5% to 20% of our income, it's under the assumption that the severance payment remains as saving. Once we take it out, we take like half of our saving, we spend it when we're young, it's missing when we're old. And Melissa can tell you that in class I do exercise with students showing them how their pension will be affected due to the fact that severance payment was taken out, and it can be affected by like 50%. So 10 million shekel is something that you can reach with the Israeli average salary if you save 18%. But if you don't save the 18%, but just the 10%, if you take the 8% of the severance payment out, you spend it, then your allowance will be like 5,000 shekels, more or less. So the how much we save is crucial to how much we will have in our retirement. Time span is also very crucial. The longer we save, the more we have, because compounding works the longer we save. The third factor is a little bit tricky, and that is how much can we expect? We usually talk about rate of return. We want to understand what is the expected rate of return on our saving to enable us to, to live decently when we're older. Now, the first thing we have to understand about the rate of return is that when we talk about longer term, we have to think in real terms and not in nominal terms. So what do I mean by real terms and nominal terms? Let's say that I saved and my saving was doubled in, 10 years. Does that mean that I can, let's say, spend double than I spend today? So the answer is depends. Depends on the price level. I mean, if the price level doubled in 10 years, then I would be able to spend exactly the same, right? If I have income which is double, but price level is also double, then, my ability to spend will remain the same. So when we talk about real terms, we talk about income which is adjusted to the price level. Usually we use the consumer price index as the measure of the price level. And we have to think about real income, real return, okay? Not about nominal. So when the bank tells you you will make 5% for 10 years, the question that you should ask yourself, what is the equivalent of 5% in terms of real terms? Now, in Israel, the government's policy is to keep inflation between 1% to 3%. So the average is around 2%. Now we can assume, obviously we cannot predict the future. We must all remember, this is something that everybody who deals with economic and finance has to remember, that prophecy was given to the fools. Okay, so we cannot predict the future, but we can make some assumptions about the future. Now, one assumption about inflation, since inflation is mainly due to government policy, we can assume that if the government has determined a policy of 2% and it will keep it, since this is the policy for the last 10 years, we can assume a 2% inflation. So 5% interest means 3% in real terms. Okay? So we have just to move from real to nominal by subtracting the inflation rate, more or less. So now let's go back to our question. What is the expected real return from our pension, from our saving? Not necessarily pension, all type of saving. So apparently there is a basic connection between risk and return, which is true for everything and specifically true for the financial world, which means that the higher the risk we take, the higher the potential return. However, we take a risk. So the riskless venues are government bonds. Government bonds mean that we lend money to the government commits itself to repay us, and for that we receive a certain interest. Okay? I said that this is the riskless option. Again, it depends in which country you live. For example, in Greece, it will be a little bit risky to take government bonds. But we have to say, to the credit of the Israeli government, that it has never defaulted on its obligation. While many other governments, like the Argentinian government, the Russian government, the Greek government, the Irish government, many governments defaulted. Certain people say that predict, but again, it's this is a prediction / prophecy that it may happen that the United States government will default on its commitment. If that will happen, it will be like a financial tsunami. But until now, most, let's say, Western government did not default on their commitment, and the Israeli government also didn't. Even in the toughest time in the 80s, when we had hyperinflation, the government did not default on its commitment. So assuming that the government will keep its promise, government bonds are the safest, and they will give us something like 2% in real terms. Okay? Just to give you a sense of the numbers, there is a very simple rule that you can use, which is called the 70-second rule. It's not after the 72nd Street in New York, it just works out that way. And the 70-second rule is very simple. If you get a certain percentage, annual percentage of return, then if you divide that percentage, or if you divide 72nd or 72 by this percentage, you will get more or less the number of years that your money will be doubled. So let me repeat. If let's say that I'm promised 6% nominal rate of return, that means that in 12 years, 72 divided by 6 will come to 12, as far as I can make the math in my head. In 12 years, I will double my money. All right? So if I will invest 1,000 whatever dollars, shekels, with a 6% nominal rate, after 12 years, I will have $2,000. All right? So it will give you a sense of what are these rates of return. Now, if we move to real return, then if I receive 2% in real term from the government, then I have to save 36 years to double my money in real terms. And what counts, obviously, is only real terms. And in order to get fourfold, I will have to save 72 years. All right? So kind of arrange our heads to the numbers, what it means. So government bonds will give us 2%. Now, 2%, if you do the calculation, and we're not doing here some financial calculation, you will see that with 2%, with average salary in Israel, you don't get to 2 million shekels after 20 or 30 years. It doesn't come to that. It's not enough. All right? And the question is, how do we increase our return? Now, the other option, let's say we have government, then we have corporate bonds, and then we have stocks. These are basically the options for investment. So corporate bonds will usually add between 1.5 to maybe 2 above government bonds. So let's say if government bonds are around 2%, corporate bonds will be around 3.5. And stocks will give us let's say 6% real, around 4% above government bonds. So in order to get a decent rate of return, we have to take some risk and put some money in stocks. Otherwise, we'll be left with the 2%, which is more or less guaranteed, but it's not enough. But the thing which is important to understand, that is something which although it's well documented, people don't understand it, is that the risk in stocks, and stocks are very risky, the risk in stocks diminishes with the period for which we save. All right? So the longer we save, the lower the risk. And here, I would like to give you some numbers just to give you the sense of it. Now, first of all, how do we know? I mean, in bonds, we know exactly what we'll receive because we receive, it's a contract. We receive a commitment from the government to get interest. How do we know what to expect from stocks? That's a tricky question. I mean, you know, stocks can go up, can go down. You can never know. It's like a roller coaster, you know, especially in the last 3 years. So we can't know for sure. What we can is we try to learn from history. So we look backwards and we ask ourselves, how much have stocks given in the past? Now, the question is how long we have to go back in order to get a sensible estimate. Okay, and again, a sensible estimate, not a prediction, not a forecast, but a sensible estimate. And here, the approach usually is that when you want to learn something about the reality, you usually take a sample, right? We know that. We want to know, let's say, if I want to know what's the average age of the Ole from the United States, I will take a representative sample, and assuming that I did my sampling right, I can get the right answer. When we look backwards on stocks return, we basically take a sample. However, our sample is limited only to, let's say, if we look 1 year back, it's limited for 1 year. If we look 2 years back, it's limited to 2 years. That's not a large enough sample. So the common approach in financial research is to take very, very long statistics. And one project that deals with that was done by 3 British economists. Their names are Dimson, Marsh, and Stoughton. Usually they are referred to as DMS. So the DMS project is that they took stocks, prices, dividends, and measures returns in 17 markets over a period of 100 and more than 110 years. They began in 1900, and they found 17 countries in which trading in stocks was not interrupted. Remember, this is a period with 2 world wars, right? I mean, there are countries that they do not exist anymore, and there are new countries that did not exist in 1900s. However, they were able to find 17 countries. Of course, Israel is not one of them. Israel was established in 1948, but United States, United Kingdom, Sweden, mostly European. And basically, they created a database of stock prices, and they were able to measure very, very long-term returns from stocks. And also, they were able to create what is called worst-case scenarios. Because what's interesting for us now is the worst-case scenario. And based on that worst-case scenarios, another finance professor from Barcelona, his name is Javier Esterada, he created a model which basically shows what is the worst-case scenario in investing in stocks given the length of period. And these are the numbers that I want to give you, just to give you a sense about what type of risk we take when we invest in stocks for short-term or for long-term. So if we move from a portfolio, which is 100% government bonds, to stocks with a fraction of 50%, which means 50% stocks, 50% government bonds, our worst-case scenario will be that we will lose about half of our investment, which is a lot. You know, think that you save, and eventually you end up with 50% of what we started with. Okay? So that's for 5 years. So investing in stocks for 5 years is very, very risky. It's almost not investing, it's a speculation. However, if we move to 30 years, so the worst case scenario in 30 years will be, and again, it's all in real terms. When I said 50%, it's 50% in real terms. It will be much higher in nominal terms. Okay? Now, in real terms, when we move to a portfolio of 100% bonds to 50-50, 50% stocks, 50% bonds, our worst case scenario will be only 3% in real terms. And that gives you the sense of the decrease in risk. So basically what is recommended, and it's even has a name, it's called the Chilean model, because in Chile the government has enforced this model as required it's required there by the law. is that the younger we should invest more in stocks, and the more we approach the age of retirement, we should move from a stock portfolio to a bonds portfolio. That will be basically the logic of creating an investment strategy, and you would expect that the pension funds will do it for you. Unfortunately, they don't. That is very unfortunate. I know in the United States they have some funds that follow these rules and basically start with a large portfolio of stocks and decrease that. In Israel, they don't have it yet. And basically it's up to us to try to determine our portfolio by moving from a plan to plan and doing our own research, which is most unfortunate because most people will not do it. I'm pretty sure, even I don't have any illusions about the results, but it's most unfortunate, but this is what I would say logic would dictate. Yes?
I'm trying to understand. You said earlier that the different pension funds are all doing the same thing.
More or less,
so
yes.
How's it going to help me to go from Harel to this one?
Well, some of them do have plans. For example, when you choose a pension plan, you can find a plan which is, let's say, tilted towards stocks. So what I would say the reasonable thing will be to start with this when you're young, and let's say when you reach the age of 35, 40, move to a more balanced, let's say 50-50, even dividing your money between two plans, one stocks, one bonds. And then when you reach 50, you move to mainly bonds. That will be I would say, the thing that will make sense. Now, you would expect that somebody will give you the product, or why should you take the bother? I mean, if this is what is required, why don't anybody pick up the glove? But the Israeli financial market is, I would say, it's a little bit retarded. It has to develop, to develop yet. Probably someone will do that in the future, but right now you have to really search. And just to give you an example, I checked the website. One of the insurance company or the pension funds, I don't remember which one, offered in their commercials a pension fund for younger people with horizon of, 35 years, and a pension fund for more people like in their 40s, 50s with a shorter horizon. So I was interested to see what is the percentage of stocks in each one of the funds, and apparently it's almost the same. So apparently what they advertise as horizon is just, it's empty words. It doesn't have any meaning because it's the same percentage when you go to look on their actual asset allocation. Yes?
Should we try to take a slice out of our funds in the pension funds and go to the bank and tell them invest this in stocks for us?
Well, let's put that aside. I'll explain what are the disadvantages of that. The more sensible thing will be probably to divide your funds or to put your funds in a stock fund at the beginning and then move it to be, I would say, more active in your managing your own pension. Not to assume that if you put it in a pension fund, they will take care of everything, because they don't. Okay? Now, why, on top of the fact that we have to save for pension, it's obligatory by law, what are the advantages? So the advantages are in terms of taxation, because the Israeli law, on top of the fact that saving for pension is required, gives a tax exempt for all these allocations. So if the employer puts aside, we said, let's say 8.3 plus 5, 13% on top of our salary aside, that is tax exempt. We don't pay taxes on that. While if you do that from your own money, then that will be after taxes. All right, so it's not very efficient to save. I mean, if you have extra money, it's always a good thing to save, but since the pension fund is tax exempt, it has a major advantage to do it through a certain pension plan. All right, so that is about more or less about pension plan. There is another way of saving which is unique to Israel. You won't find it elsewhere, which is called education fund, Keren Ishtalmut in Hebrew. Now, what is education fund? like many other things here in the employment term, it's a fiction. It was something that was given in the past for people to actually to get training. All right, so it's a kind of a saving plan for 6 years. The original purpose was to enable people to take the money and to do some training. And the 6 years is based on the sabbatical, right? Every 7 years, the money is released. Right now, it's an existing plan, which is not obligatory by law, unlike the pension fund, but many employers give education fund. It's like a benefit. And the advantage of the education fund is that it's also tax exempt, both the whatever is saved plus the return. All right, so there is no tax paid on the interest or whatever the fund gains. The gains are tax exempt. So education fund, it's a benefit. If you receive education fund, it's a benefit. Why it is a benefit? Not only because of the fact that it's tax exempt, but because the employers puts aside the grand majority of the money. The structure of the education fund is that us, the employees, we pay 2.5%, and the employer pays, in addition to that, either 5% or 7.5%. So either twice as much as we pay or 3 times as much as we pay. Again, the type of the fund depends on how much the employer can afford to pay. But in like more employers that have more means will do the 7.5, 2.5. So basically you receive 7.5% in addition to your salary. You have to put 2.5%. It's tax exempt and it becomes liquid every 6 years. In the past, in the government, people who used to work for the government where education fund is like a norm, everybody received it. It used to be for funding the new car. Every 6 years people would replace their cars because the education fund money would come out and you have some cash and you can replace the car. Again, in the same way as in the pension fund, we are entitled to save the money wherever we want. In the education fund, the Israeli Ministry of Finance has allowed several years ago to save in a kind of an individual retirement account. So in the education fund, you are able to manage your own funds. However, the companies who do that will only offer you the service from, let's say, 100,000 shekels and above. So if you have that amount, you can manage it yourself. If you don't, you have to go to a managed account. Now, if you don't need the money, and you can put it aside, then you can increase your saving for retirement by another 10%, which is very substantial. So again, I'm preaching for things that I haven't done in the past, but it's like, don't do what I do what I say. But it will be advisable to save that money too, unless you really want to replace your car. Yes, you want to ask something?
You can put that back into your pension fund?
No, but you can keep it in your education fund and it will be tax exempt, so it will be the same thing. Yeah, you just, if you don't withdraw it, you don't pay taxes. You pay the taxes on the gains only when you withdraw it. The advantage of the education fund is that you can withdraw it as one amount. Unlike the pension fund, which you cannot withdraw as one amount, you will receive allowance based on the conversion factor. The education fund can be withdrawn after 6 years in one amount, and then you can do with it whatever you want. Yes?
Okay, so that it became liquid after 6 years, that you recommend if we don't need the money to keep it in?
Yes.
But after, say I want to take it out on the 8th or 9th year, would I get a penalty for that?
No. Basically, the advantage of not taking the money is that you only pay the taxes on the earnings, on the gains, when you withdraw the money. So basically, when you don't take it out, you defer your taxes to a later period, which is always a good thing, We all appreciate very much what the government does with our money, but when it comes to us personally, we prefer to defer our taxes to as far as possible. So it's an advantage to keep the money there because of the tax. And now the funny thing is that every year when there is a kind of budgetary cuts, every year the government said we are going to cancel the tax exempt on the pension fund, and then the union, the Histadrut, said when we'll have a major strike, and they and then they back off and they don't do it. So it seems that it will be protected also in the future. Somebody want to ask something? Yeah.
Yes. So, you said that the employer and the employee contribute money to the
Education fund. Right.
What happens if you quit your job? Does interest continue to build?
Yes. The interest continue to build, just that there are no, then it's called an inactive education fund, and the interest continue to build, and then after 6 years you can take the money.
Okay.
So it's a very good way. Usually people use it for short-term saving, which is also okay. You know, sometimes we need money, you know, you want to take a trip, not now, but in 5 or 6 years. So, you know, that you have some savings and you will have the money. You want to, look, I used my education fund to buy my first apartment, my first and my current. I didn't replace it. Sometimes it's good that you have some liquid money at your disposal that you didn't take into consideration, and it just accumulated, and suddenly you find out that you have some extra 100 or 200,000 shekels. You know, it doesn't bother, right? It doesn't hurt. Yeah.
How do you open an education fund?
You fill some forms. Usually when you join, in your workplace, once it's offered to you, and it's a benefit that many employers offered, then you have to decide which education fund you want, and then you just fill the forms, and you know, you have to fill some forms, make a photocopy of your ID or passport, and that's it. It's a very simple process. Now, in terms of choosing, again, there are many. I think there are probably around 200 education funds in Israel, maybe even more. But most of them, there is no difference. You know, most of them are in what is called general. Basically, they are divided according to their investment policy. Most fund will be defined as general. General means that the fund manager can do whatever they want with your money. They are free to decide. And you are assuming that they will make the right decisions. The problem is that you can't know in advance who will make the right decision and who will make the wrong decisions. And at the end of the day, some of them make money, some of them lose money. The question is whether you were in the making or losing. So my recommendation will be, it's not so important to choose whoever. I mean, you have to look at the management fees. That's a factor, obviously. And remember that managing fees are negotiable. You can negotiate. Not only here, in the United States too, but here is the Middle East, so you have to negotiate for sure. You can negotiate on management fund. Obviously, your negotiation power grows the more money you have. Or if, like in a workplace, several employees come as a group to a fund and say, we will all move to your fund, then they can renegotiate and decrease the management fees. It's all a bargaining issue. Yes?
And if you're self-employed, can you open up a
Yes. If you're self-employed, you can also open an education fund. Obviously, you will do all the allocation, but it's basically part of what you pay to the fund is deducted from your taxes. So you get a tax exempt. There are certain limits, but and it's very advisable. Your accountant will probably tell you that at the end of the year, you should put like a couple of thousand of shekels to the education fund, and by that, you save on your taxes, and you get the money back in 6 years. So it's a very good deal. You know, you don't pay taxes, you get it back in 6 years. It's not a bad deal.
So you just call up the fund first?
Yeah, you find a fund in the internet or in any other website. I have a website which lists the funds and their different measures. Or you can either do it directly. You can use an agent. You don't have to use an agent. Some people think that they have to use an agent. You don't have to use an agent, although sometimes agents will be able to reduce your management fees because they have different arrangement with the funds. So it needs to be checked. I mean, agent, yes or no, depends. You have to remember that when you use an agent, in economics, it's called the agent problem. And the agent problem means that the agent interest and your interest are not always aligned. For example, the agent may have agreements with certain companies and not with other companies, and he or she will recommend to you the companies that they have contacts with, while you may want other companies. And also, in terms of pensions, in the past, for example, agents used to recommend mainly on directors' insurance because their commissions on director insurance were higher. Now, you don't know exactly what are the arrangements that the agent has with the company, so you have to be careful with the recommendation. But if you know what you want, and then you come to an agent that will get to you lower management fees, that can be a good deal. All right, so it's okay to use agents, but you just need to know exactly what to expect from them. All right, I think I'm more or less, so let's stop here. If you have questions. Yes,
I have a question.
sure, go ahead.
My understanding was there was going to be discussion on investing in mortgages. Was this the end of the whole?
Well, I can, if I don't know what's your time length, but if you want, I can talk a little bit about mortgages. Yeah, I don't want to take your entire evening, but so basically, we finished with the savings. All right. I mean, there is a very interesting distinction between savings and speculation, which was done by Benjamin Graham. I don't know if you heard the name. He was the teacher of Warren Buffett. Probably heard the name Warren Buffett, right? So he was his teacher in Columbia University. He invented value investing, and he said that it's very easy to determine whether you save or speculate. It depends on your time span. If your time span is shorter than 10 years, then you speculate. If your time span is higher, then you invest. So we talked about saving. Now, regarding mortgages, which is by the way, another form of saving, because by taking a mortgage, you basically save. You pay the mortgage, but you get in return an asset, your apartment, which on top, we have to remember that when we look on real estate has two functions. The first function is a place to live, but we can rent a place to live. The other part is it's kind of a storage of value, because if we have an apartment, it keeps the value for us, for our children, if we want to pass it after we are not here anymore. So it's a way to store value. It's an asset. Now, in terms of mortgages, mortgages are taken from banks. Most usual banks will have kind of a mortgage department, which is another bank, but it's under the major bank. Now, the grand majority of mortgages here will be with either there will be three different ways to calculate the way we repay our mortgage. The first is fixed payment with nominal interest rate. All right? At the present, it will be around between 6 to 7%. And when you will be offered a mortgage with a fixed nominal interest rate, then you can know in advance what will be your repayment from now until the end of the mortgage. Okay, in shekels, in nominal terms, in actual money. Okay, so that is a big advantage because you have a certainty. You know exactly how much you will have to repay from here until you finish the mortgage. The other alternatives are with a variable interest rate. One way is variable interest rate, which is linked to what is called the prime rate. Prime rate is a kind of rate which is agreed between the banks, which is used as kind of a floor for rates which are charged for mortgages. Usually it will be a few percentage points above the rate that will be determined by the Bank of Israel. Now, the advantage is that if you have to pay today 6%, 6.5% for a mortgage with a fixed rate, if you go to a variable rate, you will be offered 2.5. So that seems like a great bargain, 2.5 instead of 6. But there is a huge risk in variable rate because rate can change and it can increase significantly, and we cannot tell by how much. That was, by the way, one of the problems in the United States in 2007, 2008, that people took mortgages with variable rates. Suddenly rates went up, and people realized that they can't pay the mortgage. ריבית משתנה. ריבית משתנה. So variable rate is now very attractive because rates are very low, but there is a significant risk, and due to that, banks limit the amount that they will be willing to give you with variable rate because they realize that you, us as consumer, do not know how to evaluate this risk. We are tempted by the low rate, and we don't think that it can change. The third way is a rate which is linked to the consumer price index. Tzamud lamadad, it's called in Hebrew. And that means that we pay a lower rate, which will be around, let's say, 2%, but it is indexed, which means that the rate is recalculated every month according to the increase or decrease in the consumer price index. So basically our payment is variable in nominal terms, but it's fixed in real terms. When we connect our payment to the consumer price index, we fixed our payment in real terms. Now, what is the advantage of that? The advantage is that in the long run, even in the medium run, salaries are more or less, they're not linked to the consumer price index, but they more or less advance with the consumer price index. So basically, that if you look at long-term statistics of Israeli salaries for the last 20 or 30 years, you can see that in the past, real salaries went up. But starting from the 1990s, real salaries do not change much. They keep more or less the same. That means that nominal salaries are more or less adjusted to inflation. So that means that if I take a mortgage with a rate which is fixed or linked to the CPI, I basically determine what will be the proportion of my repayment from my income. So if my current payment is 25% of my income, it will remain the same thing as long as I pay the mortgage. Again, there is a certain risk that salaries will deviate from CPI, but the more or less they advance with the CPI. So what is the advantage? The advantage is that I pay less now and I will pay more, let's say in 20 years. Now, if let's say I'm taking a mortgage and I don't have any reason to assume that my income will increase in the next 20 years, then it will be better for me to take a fixed rate and to fix or to determine my payments. But if I take a mortgage when I'm 25 or 30 and I expect that my salary will increase, I will, climb the ladder, I'll become an executive director, then it makes sense to take a mortgage which is linked to the CPI because I pay less now, I will pay more in the future, but I will also earn more in the future. So it will be easier for me in the future to pay the higher amounts. So these are the three basic vehicles that these are your choices when you take a mortgage. And again, there is no way to anticipate exactly what will be the CPI, but we can assume that salaries will more or less advance with the CPI. So the decision on which one to take depends on our age and our expectations about our salaries. All right? That clarifies the point? So without going into numbers, that's what I can recommend about mortgages. Any more questions? Yes?
To follow up, I guess, more about mortgages. I've heard that, unlike in the States, where your mortgage would be based on your financial history with the bank or more like hard fact numbers, I probably will say that your relationship here with your banker is very important, and if they like you and your personal relationship. Can you speak more about that?
Well, I have to tell you that my experience is different. I mean, I took my mortgage almost 20 years ago, and none of the bankers that I did market research, none of them knew me or had any relationship with me. They looked at my pay slips, they want to know how much money I make, they want to know how much money my wife makes. Sometimes they want to have like either collaterals or people who will guarantee your mortgage, and they want to know how much money they make. So I'm not aware of any personal issues about that. Remember, bank is a business. They have to make sure that you repay, and your personal relationship will not give the money back. So I don't have any experience with what you're describing. I mean, it may be true, but I haven't encountered that.
Second question as a follow-up, I also heard that the down payment is much, much greater than the States.
Well, it was limited. When I took a mortgage, I could take 80% of the value of the apartment as a mortgage. Now it's limited to 50, so you have to bring 50%. 50, yeah. Recently they have limited.
I thought 42.
What?
When did it change?
But I also
We
thought it
were
was
told
40.
by Nefesh, I was told I guess a little bit longer now, almost a year, that it was 40% down.
And even that.
Well, to the best of my knowledge, recently they have limited mortgage to 50%, but I may be wrong in that. But what I'm sure is that you can't take 80% anymore. That does not exist. I'm not sure if it exists in the United States anymore. Remember that part of the fact that United States went into a huge crisis in 2008 was that people were taking a mortgage which was 100% on the value of the property. I heard a lecture once, this company in Israel which is now in big trouble, Delek Nadlan, they had a large project in, I think in Palm Beach, a real estate project. And the CEO described how they sold the apartment. So he said, well, we had a kind of a conference and we presented the project. It was all on paper. I mean, nothing was even, not one tractor went on the ground. Everything was on paper. People came to look on the beautiful presentation. You know, today you can, with computers, you can show very beautiful presentations. And then once they looked at the apartment, there was a person behind and said, well, I am from bank so-and-so, and I'm willing to finance the apartment right away. 100% mortgage, just sign the papers. And they sold on paper probably 80% of it was a huge project, a couple of hundreds of apartments. They sold it almost entirely on that same day, everything from external finance. People didn't have to pay nothing as down payment. And then obviously, when people discovered that they can pay the mortgage, they walked out, the bank remained with the loans, and here we go with the financial crisis. So I'm not sure that in the United States you can get 80% now. I'm not that familiar, but I think they increased the down payment in the United States. Here, as far as I know, it's now 50%, but I may be wrong in a couple of percentage. And that's the situation. I mean, that's what usually people do in order to overcome that. You know, for every law there is a counter law, is that parents here in Israel, what they do, they take a mortgage on their apartment, they give their money to their sons or daughters, and then they take this money as if it was their down payment, and then take a mortgage on the new apartment. Eventually, you come up with an apartment which is fully funded by two mortgages, but it's as if there was a down payment. So that's another way. If you have parents that can do it for you, then that's another way to do it. Yes?
I don't have parents who can do that for me. So what strategies or advice can you give to mitigate this impossible down payment?
Well, I would say that if you insist on buying an apartment, by the way, in Israel, renting an apartment is more economic than in the United States, because the rent you pay here in comparison to the prices of the apartment is lower in terms of rate of return. Usually what you pay here is about 3%. If you take, for example, if you take the area where I live in Pisgat Ze'ev, the apartments there are, let's say, 1.2, 1.3 million shekels. And you can get for rent, let's say, 4,000 a month, which will be around 50,000 a year. So it's around 3.5%. In the United States, you will pay much higher rent for the same value of apartment. So renting here is more economic. The only disadvantage is that due to a law that was passed here many years ago, which is called the law of protecting the how do you call the people who rent? Rentier?
דיירים,
The
דיירים משכיר או סוחר?
השוכר. Not the landlord, the tenants. So there is a law here for protecting the tenants, and due to that law, you can't have a long-term rent, which is a disadvantage. But I would say that if you can get an apartment for rent here for like 10 years, it's a better deal than buying an apartment, because the rent you will pay will be lower. The other alternative is to move to the periphery. There you can find cheaper apartment. I would say these are the only options. I mean, I teach in Beersheba, the prices there are much lower. And if you go even further to Yerucham and places like that, well, what can you do, I mean, probably you can't afford living in Manhattan too, right? Any more questions? All right, so good luck with your financial affairs. Thank you very much.